3 a.m. The digital clock's red glow burned through Jade Morrison's eyelids like a brand. Sleep had abandoned her again, leaving behind only the phantom weight of a rifle scope against her eye and the distant echo of a heartbeat that wasn't her own. In the darkness of her studio apartment in Colorado Springs, she could still feel the crosshairs settling over a target 2,000 miles away. The nightmares weren't memories anymore. They were prophecies.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The recruitment officer had called it a gift. Staff Sergeant Patricia Hawkins sat across from 22-year-old Jade Morrison in a sterile military processing station in Denver, her weathered hands folding over a file thick with psychological evaluations and marksmanship scores that defied statistical probability. "Your sleep study results are unusual," Hawkins said, her voice carrying the kind of measured tone reserved for discussing classified material. The lab technicians ran the tests 3 times. During REM sleep, your neural activity spikes in areas associated with spatial awareness and target acquisition. It's like your brain is training while you dream. Jade shifted in the uncomfortable plastic chair, her fingers unconsciously mimicking the grip she'd use on a rifle stock. She'd been having the dreams since childhood. Vivid, detailed visions where she moved through unfamiliar terrain with impossible precision, eliminating targets she'd never seen in places she'd never been. What had once terrified her parents and landed her in therapy sessions now sat before her as a military asset evaluation. "The Army has a specialized program," Hawkins continued, "for individuals with your particular aptitude. You'd be trained as a designated marksman, but your role would extend far beyond conventional sniper operations. Your dreams appear to be processing tactical scenarios at an accelerated rate. We want to see what happens when we feed them real intelligence." The offer came with a substantial signing bonus, advanced training at Fort Benning, and assignment to an experimental unit designated only as Echo Division. Jade's student loans had been accumulating interest faster than her part-time job at a Denver sporting goods store could manage, and the recurring dreams had made holding down steady employment nearly impossible. Sleep deprivation had become her constant companion, leaving her functioning on 3 to 4 hours of rest per night. Within 6 months, Jade found herself at a classified facility in the Nevada desert, surrounded by other soldiers whose files bore similar psychological anomalies. There was Marcus Chen, whose tactical precognition manifested during high-stress scenarios. Sarah Williams demonstrated impossible accuracy with thrown objects after experiencing specific types of nightmares. David Rodriguez could navigate complex terrain in complete darkness following what military psychologists termed prophetic dreaming episodes. The training regimen pushed beyond conventional military doctrine. Instead of fighting against their unusual neurological patterns, Echo Division's program amplified them. Jade's sleep schedule was carefully monitored and manipulated. Specific audio frequencies played through bone conduction headphones during her REM cycles, feeding her subconscious mind detailed satellite imagery, target profiles, and tactical scenarios from active conflict zones. The results were immediate and unsettling. Her accuracy rating soared beyond anything recorded in military history. During live-fire exercises, Jade could consistently place rounds within a quarter-inch grouping at distances exceeding 1,500 meters. More disturbing was her ability to predict target movement patterns with uncanny precision, as if she'd already seen the engagement play out in dreams that felt more real than waking life. Dr. Elizabeth Morgan, the program's chief neuroscientist, documented everything with the enthusiasm of a researcher who'd stumbled onto a breakthrough that would redefine human potential. Her daily sessions with Jade became increasingly invasive, probing not just the mechanics of the dreams, but their emotional and psychological impact. "Describe the sensation when you're acquiring the target," Dr. Morgan would say, her pen poised over legal pads filled with notes in cramped handwriting. "Walk me through the entire sequence from the initial sight picture to trigger pull." Jade learned to compartmentalize the clinical descriptions from the reality of what happened in those moments. The dreams had evolved from random nightmare sequences into structured tactical exercises. She would find herself positioned on rooftops, mountainsides, or concealed in urban environments, methodically working through target lists with mechanical efficiency. The faces of her targets became increasingly detailed and realistic. Their final expressions burned into her memory with photographic clarity. The psychological evaluations painted a picture of a soldier adapting to extreme circumstances, but Jade knew the truth was more complex. The boundary between dream and reality had begun to blur in ways that the military psychiatrists couldn't quantify in their reports. She would wake with muscle memory of recoil that hadn't happened, with the taste of desert air from conflicts she'd never physically attended, with intimate knowledge of terrain she'd never walked. Her first deployment came 8 months into the program. The mission briefing took place in a windowless conference room where Colonel James Patterson outlined an operation in the mountains of Afghanistan. Intelligence had identified a high-value target operating from a compound accessible only through a narrow valley approach. Traditional assault would result in heavy casualties, but a single precision shot from an overwatch position could eliminate the threat with minimal collateral damage.
Morrison, you'll be inserted at grid reference 41 Sierra, Mike 7743, Colonel Patterson said, his laser pointer highlighting a position on the topographical display. Effective range to target will be approximately 1,800 meters, with significant wind variables and elevation changes to account for. As the colonel spoke, Jade felt an eerie familiarity wash over her. She'd been in this exact position before, seen this precise terrain layout, calculated these exact environmental factors. In her dreams 3 weeks prior, she'd executed this mission successfully, placing a single shot that neutralized the target while he stood in a specific doorway at what would be 0347 local time. The helicopter insertion went exactly as she dreamed. The rocky outcropping provided perfect concealment, the wind patterns matched her nocturnal calculations, and when the target emerged from the compound at the predicted time, Jade's crosshairs were already waiting. The shot broke clean and true, covering 1,823 meters in just over 2 seconds before finding its mark with surgical precision. The mission debriefing should have been routine, but Dr. Morgan's presence indicated something more significant was being evaluated. "Walk me through your decision-making process," she said, her recording equipment capturing every nuance of Jade's response. "When did you know the target would appear in that specific location?" Jade had practiced deflecting these questions, but the truth pressed against her consciousness like a physical weight. "Experience and pattern recognition," she replied, using the terminology that had become standard in her reports. The intelligence briefing provided enough environmental factors to make an educated prediction. Dr. Morgan's eyes held a knowing quality that suggested she wasn't entirely convinced by the official explanation. "Your accuracy rate has exceeded statistical probability by factors that challenge our understanding of human capability. The dreams are becoming more than training simulations, aren't they?" The question hung in the air like cordite after a shot, impossible to ignore and dangerous to answer honestly. Jade's subsequent missions had grown increasingly complex, taking her from the mountains of Central Asia to urban environments in Syria, from desert compounds in Iraq to jungle positions in undisclosed locations throughout Africa and South America. Each operation followed the same pattern: detailed dream sequences that provided tactical intelligence weeks before official briefings, perfect execution of shots that should have been impossible, and growing questions from handlers who couldn't explain what they were witnessing. The psychological cost accumulated with each deployment. Sleep became a battlefield where Jade fought engagements that would manifest weeks later in real combat zones. Her dreams no longer felt like subconscious processing, but like reconnaissance missions conducted by her sleeping mind across vast distances. She would wake exhausted, having spent 8 hours maneuvering through hostile territory and eliminating targets with methodical precision. The nightmares that had once terrorized her childhood had evolved into something far more disturbing: prophetic visions that invariably came true.
Each successful mission validated the reliability of her dream intelligence, creating a feedback loop that strengthened whatever neurological anomaly drove her abilities. The military's experimental program had awakened something in her brain that operated according to rules that conventional science couldn't explain. 6 months into active deployment, Jade's success rate remained perfect across 17 separate operations. Her handlers had stopped questioning her intelligence sources and simply incorporated her dream-derived tactical information into official mission planning. She had become the military's most valuable and mysterious asset, a soldier whose nightmares provided strategic advantages that turned impossible shots into routine eliminations. But as her reputation grew within the classified circles of special operations, so did her isolation from anything resembling normal human experience. The dreams consumed increasing amounts of her sleep cycle, leaving her functioning in a permanent state of exhaustion, punctuated by moments of supernatural clarity when her rifle scope aligned with targets that her sleeping mind had already marked for death. The nightmares that had once terrorized her childhood had evolved into something far more disturbing, prophetic visions that invariably came true. Each successful mission validated the reliability of her dream intelligence, creating a feedback loop that strengthened whatever neurological anomaly drove her abilities. The military's experimental program had awakened something in her brain that operated according to rules that conventional science couldn't explain. 6 months into active deployment, Jade's success rate remained perfect across 17 separate operations. Her handlers had stopped questioning her intelligence sources and simply incorporated her dream-derived tactical information into official mission planning. She had become the military's most valuable and mysterious asset, a soldier whose nightmares provided strategic advantages that turned impossible shots into routine eliminations. But as her reputation grew within the classified circles of special operations, so did her isolation from anything resembling normal human experience. The dreams consumed increasing amounts of her sleep cycle, leaving her functioning in a permanent state of exhaustion, punctuated by moments of supernatural clarity when her rifle scope aligned with targets that her sleeping mind had already marked for death. The psychological cost accumulated with each deployment. Sleep became a battlefield where Jade fought engagements that would manifest weeks later in real combat zones. Her dreams no longer felt like subconscious processing, but like reconnaissance missions conducted by her sleeping mind across vast distances. She would wake exhausted, having spent 8 hours maneuvering through hostile territory and eliminating targets with methodical precision. The nightmares that had once terrorized her childhood had evolved into something far more disturbing, prophetic visions that invariably came true. Each successful mission validated the reliability of her dream intelligence, creating a feedback loop that strengthened whatever neurological anomaly drove her abilities. The military's experimental program had awakened something in her brain that operated according to rules that conventional science couldn't explain. 6 months into active deployment, Jade's success rate remained perfect across 17 separate operations. Her handlers had stopped questioning her intelligence sources and simply incorporated her dream-derived tactical information into official mission planning. She had become the military's most valuable and mysterious asset, a soldier whose nightmares provided strategic advantages that turned impossible shots into routine eliminations. But as her reputation grew within the classified circles of special operations, so did her isolation from anything resembling normal human experience. The dreams consumed increasing amounts of her sleep cycle, leaving her functioning in a permanent state of exhaustion, punctuated by moments of supernatural clarity when her rifle scope aligned with targets that her sleeping mind had already marked for death.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Morrison, report to debrief in 20 minutes. Major Webb's voice carried an edge that suggested this conversation would venture beyond routine operational analysis. The sessions had grown more frequent and invasive as Jade's success rate continued to defy explanation through conventional military doctrine. The debriefing room felt different this time. Instead of the usual recording equipment and psychological evaluation forms, a new face sat across from Jade, Dr. Richard Stone from the Defense Intelligence Agency, whose presence indicated that Echo Division's experimental program had attracted attention from the highest levels of military intelligence. Sergeant Morrison, your operational success has generated interest throughout the defense community. Dr. Stone began, his manner suggesting someone accustomed to handling classified material that challenged conventional understanding. However, we've identified patterns in your dream reports that extend beyond tactical precognition. You've been describing geographical details and personnel information that wasn't included in your mission briefings, yet proves accurate during post-operation verification. Jade had anticipated this line of questioning. Her dreams had evolved beyond simple combat scenarios to include detailed intelligence about enemy positions, communication protocols, and operational timelines that official reconnaissance couldn't have provided. She was accessing information through channels that the intelligence community couldn't identify or replicate. The dreams have become more detailed over the past few months, she admitted, knowing that denial would only intensify their scrutiny. I see things that aren't in the briefing materials, but they prove relevant to the mission objectives. Dr. Stone leaned forward, his interests sharpening. Describe the source of this additional intelligence. Are you aware of any external factors that might be influencing your dream content? The question touched on territory that Jade had been reluctant to explore even in her private thoughts. The dreams no longer felt like products of her own subconscious mind, but like briefings conducted by an intelligence network that operated outside normal sensory channels. She would wake with knowledge of enemy patrol schedules, weapon caches, and communication frequencies that proved accurate when verified by electronic surveillance. I don't know where the information comes from, she said, the admission feeling like a crack in the professional facade she'd maintained throughout the program. The dreams feel like I'm accessing someone else's intelligence network. Sometimes I wake up knowing things that I shouldn't be able to know. Dr. Stone exchanged glances with Major Webb, a silent communication that suggested this conversation had moved into predetermined territory. We want to conduct an extended study of your abilities under controlled conditions. There's a facility in Montana where we can monitor your dream cycles while exposing you to live intelligence feeds from multiple operational theaters. The goal is to determine whether your precognitive abilities can be directed towards specific targets and objectives. The Montana facility looked like a high-security medical research center from the outside, but the interior revealed something closer to a sensory deprivation laboratory designed for a single subject. Jade's quarters featured monitoring equipment that tracked everything from brainwave patterns to electromagnetic field fluctuations around her sleeping form. The research team, led by Dr. Amanda Foster, represented a collaboration between military intelligence, neuroscience, and theoretical physics that suggested the program had evolved far beyond conventional psychological warfare research. We're going to feed your subconscious mind intelligence from 6 different active operations simultaneously. Satellite imagery, intercepted communications, personnel files, and tactical assessments will be transmitted through subliminal audio during your REM cycles. We want to see if your dreams can process multiple operational theaters and provide actionable intelligence for each scenario. The first night of enhanced testing produced results that challenged everything the research team thought they understood about human consciousness. Jade's dreams expanded beyond individual operations to encompass a comprehensive intelligence network spanning continents. She moved seamlessly between engagements in Eastern Europe, North Africa, and Southeast Asia, gathering tactical information and identifying targets with the efficiency of a computer algorithm processing vast databases. But the expanded scope came with psychological costs that the monitoring equipment couldn't quantify. Jade began experiencing identity fragmentation during her waking hours, struggling to distinguish between memories from her actual deployments and experiences from dream operations that felt equally real. She would catch herself planning tactical approaches to buildings in Colorado Springs as if they were hostile targets, or analyzing civilians for threat assessment patterns that belonged in combat zones. Dr. Foster documented everything with scientific enthusiasm, but Major Webb's reports reflected growing concerns about the sustainability of the program.
Jade's psychological evaluations showed markers consistent with dissociative disorders, post-traumatic stress, and something the psychiatrists couldn't classify, a disconnect from individual identity that suggested her consciousness was adapting to process information on a scale beyond normal human capacity. The subject demonstrates unprecedented intelligence-gathering capabilities during REM sleep, Dr. Foster wrote in her weekly summary, but shows increasing signs of psychological fragmentation during waking hours. Her dreams appear to be accessing information through channels we cannot identify or replicate through conventional intelligence-gathering methods.
3 weeks into the Montana testing, Jade experienced a breakthrough that would reshape the military's understanding of her abilities. Her dreams began providing intelligence about operations that hadn't been planned yet, tactical scenarios for targets that intelligence agencies hadn't identified, in locations where no military presence was scheduled. She was seeing future engagements with the same clarity and accuracy that had characterized her precognitive abilities for past missions. The implications terrified the research team. If Jade's dreams could predict future military operations with the same reliability she demonstrated for immediate tactical scenarios, the strategic advantages would be unprecedented. But the psychological cost of processing intelligence from multiple timelines and operational theaters was pushing her toward a complete break from normal human consciousness. "I'm losing myself," she told Dr. Foster during one of their increasingly frequent sessions. "I wake up and I don't know which memories are mine and which belong to the dreams. Sometimes I'm not sure if I'm Jade Morrison or if I'm just one of the tactical assets that my sleeping mind uses to process information." The research team faced a critical decision. They could continue pushing the boundaries of Jade's abilities, potentially unlocking intelligence capabilities that would revolutionize military operations. Or they could scale back the program before the psychological damage became irreversible, accepting the loss of humanity's most effective strategic asset in favor of preserving what remained of Jade's individual identity. The choice would determine not just the future of Echo Division's experimental program, but whether Jade Morrison would emerge from the Montana facility as an enhanced human weapon or as something else entirely. The abandoned warehouse in Detroit served as an unlikely testing ground for what Dr. Morgan now classified as enhanced precognitive targeting. Jade crouched behind a makeshift area, her modified rifle equipped with sensors that tracked everything from her heart rate to the micro-tremors in her trigger finger. The urban environment had been meticulously recreated based on intelligence from an upcoming operation in Mosul, complete with the same architectural details and sightlines that had appeared in her dreams 2 weeks earlier. "Target acquisition in Sector 7, came the voice through her earpiece. Technical Sergeant Robert Hayes monitored her vitals from a command trailer outside, his screens displaying biometric data that painted a picture of a soldier operating in an almost meditative state. "Jade, your RM patterns last night showed increased activity in the visual cortex. Are you seeing the scenario play out exactly as dreamed?" She adjusted her scope, the crosshairs settling on a figure that moved precisely as her sleeping mind had predicted. "Affirmative. The subject will move to the eastern window in 12 seconds, presenting a clean shot opportunity for approximately 4 seconds before returning to cover. The target, a volunteer instructor playing the role of a high-value asset, moved exactly as forecasted. Jade's training round found its mark with mechanical precision, but the satisfaction of accuracy had long since been replaced by something closer to unease. Her dreams weren't just predicting enemy movements anymore. They were orchestrating entire tactical scenarios with an intelligence that seemed to extend far beyond her own consciousness." Major Catherine Webb observed from the control room, her expression reflecting growing concerns about the psychological profile emerging from Jade's evaluations. The official reports praised her unprecedented effectiveness, but the classified addendums painted a picture of a soldier whose relationship with reality had become increasingly tenuous. Sleep studies showed that Jade spent nearly 70% of her rest cycle in deep REM sleep, far exceeding normal parameters and suggesting neurological changes that the medical team couldn't fully explain. "Morrison, report to debrief in 20 minutes. Major Webb's voice carried an edge that suggested this conversation would venture beyond routine operational analysis.
The sessions had grown more frequent and invasive as Jade's success rate continued to defy explanation through conventional military doctrine. The debriefing room felt different this time. Instead of the usual recording equipment and psychological evaluation forms, a new face sat across from Jade, Dr. Richard Stone from the Defense Intelligence Agency, whose presence indicated that Echo Division's experimental program had attracted attention from the highest levels of military intelligence. Sergeant Morrison, your operational success has generated interest throughout the defense community, Dr. Stone began, his manner suggesting someone accustomed to handling classified material that challenges conventional understanding. However, we've identified patterns in your dream reports that extend beyond tactical precognition. You've been describing geographical details and personnel information that wasn't included in your mission briefings, yet proves accurate during post-operation verification.
Jade had anticipated this line of questioning. Her dreams had evolved beyond simple combat scenarios to include detailed intelligence about enemy positions, communication protocols, and operational timelines that official reconnaissance couldn't have provided. She was accessing information through channels that the intelligence community couldn't identify or replicate. The dreams have become more detailed over the past few months, she admitted, knowing that denial would only intensify their scrutiny. I see things that aren't in the briefing materials, but they prove relevant to the mission objectives. Dr. Stone leaned forward, his interest sharpening. Describe the source of this additional intelligence. Are you aware of any external factors that might be influencing your dream content? The question touched on territory that Jade had been reluctant to explore, even in her private thoughts. The dreams no longer felt like products of her own subconscious mind, but like briefings conducted by an intelligence network that operated outside normal sensory channels. She would wake with knowledge of enemy patrol schedules, weapon caches, and communication frequencies that proved accurate when verified by electronic surveillance. I don't know where the information comes from, she said, the admission feeling like a crack in the professional facade she'd maintained throughout the program. The dreams feel like I'm accessing someone else's intelligence network. Sometimes I wake up knowing things that I shouldn't be able to know. Dr. Stone exchanged glances with Major Webb, a silent communication that suggested this conversation had moved into predetermined territory. We want to conduct an extended study of your abilities under controlled conditions. There's a facility in Montana where we can monitor your dream cycles while exposing you to live intelligence feeds from multiple operational theaters. The goal is to determine whether your precognitive abilities can be directed towards specific targets and objectives. The Montana facility looked like a high-security medical research center from the outside, but the interior revealed something closer to a sensory deprivation laboratory designed for a single subject. Jade's quarters featured monitoring equipment that tracked everything from brainwave patterns to electromagnetic field fluctuations around her sleeping form. The research team, led by Dr. Amanda Foster, represented a collaboration between military intelligence, neuroscience, and theoretical physics that suggested the program had evolved far beyond conventional psychological warfare research. We're going to feed your subconscious mind intelligence from 6 different active operations simultaneously, Dr. Foster explained during the initial briefing. Satellite imagery, intercepted communications, personnel files, and tactical assessments will be transmitted through subliminal audio during your REM cycles. We want to see if your dreams can process multiple operational theaters and provide actionable intelligence for each scenario. The first night of enhanced testing challenged everything the research team thought they understood about human consciousness. Jade's dreams expanded beyond individual operations to encompass a comprehensive intelligence network spanning continents. She moved seamlessly between engagements in Eastern Europe, North Africa, and Southeast Asia, gathering tactical information and identifying targets with the efficiency of a computer algorithm processing vast databases. But the expanded scope came with psychological costs that the monitoring equipment couldn't quantify. Jade began experiencing identity fragmentation during her waking hours, struggling to distinguish between memories from her actual deployments and experiences from dream operations that felt equally real.
She would catch herself planning tactical approaches to buildings in Colorado as if they were hostile targets, or analyzing civilians for threat assessment patterns that belonged in combat zones. Dr. Foster documented everything with scientific enthusiasm, but Major Webb's reports reflected growing concerns about the sustainability of the program. Jade's psychological evaluations showed markers consistent with dissociative disorders, post-traumatic stress, and something the psychiatrists couldn't classify: a disconnection from individual identity that suggested her consciousness was adapting to process information on a scale beyond normal human capacity. The subject demonstrates unprecedented intelligence-gathering capabilities during REM sleep, Dr. Foster wrote in her weekly summary, but shows increasing signs of psychological fragmentation during waking hours. Her dreams appear to be accessing information through channels we cannot identify or replicate through conventional intelligence-gathering methods.
3 weeks into the Montana testing, Jade experienced a breakthrough that would reshape the military's understanding of her abilities. Her dreams began providing intelligence about operations that hadn't been planned yet, tactical scenarios for targets that intelligence agencies hadn't identified, in locations where no military presence was scheduled. She was seeing future engagements with the same clarity and accuracy that had characterized her precognitive abilities for past missions. The implications terrified the research team. If Jade's dreams could predict future military operations with the same reliability she demonstrated for immediate tactical scenarios, the strategic advantages would be unprecedented. But the psychological cost of processing intelligence from multiple timelines and operational theaters was pushing her toward a complete break from normal human consciousness. "I'm losing myself," she told Dr. Foster during one of their increasingly frequent sessions. "I wake up and I don't know which memories are mine and which belong to the dreams. Sometimes I'm not sure if I'm Jade Morrison or if I'm just one of the tactical assets that my sleeping mind uses to process information." The research team faced a critical decision. They could continue pushing the boundaries of Jade's abilities, potentially unlocking intelligence capabilities that would revolutionize military operations. Or they could scale back the program before the psychological damage became irreversible, accepting the loss of humanity's most effective strategic asset in favor of preserving what remained of Jade's individual identity. The choice would determine not just the future of Echo Division's experimental program, but whether Jade Morrison would emerge from the Montana facility as an enhanced human weapon or as something else entirely. The emergency at the Montana facility began at 3:17 a.m. when Jade's monitoring equipment registered brain activity levels that exceeded safe parameters by a factor of 3. Dr. Foster rushed into the observation room to find every screen displaying neural patterns that resembled a seizure, but Jade remained perfectly still in her sleep chamber, her breathing steady and her body relaxed. She was accessing something far beyond the intelligence feeds the research team had provided. Her consciousness is operating in 11 different scenarios simultaneously, Dr. Foster whispered to the night technician, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and horror. "Look at the REM tracking. She's processing tactical information from operations spanning the next 6 months across 4 continents." What the medical team couldn't see was the scope of Jade's dream experience. She found herself commanding oversight of a vast intelligence network where individual operations connected into patterns of global significance. Her consciousness moved fluidly between urban combat scenarios in Baghdad, mountain warfare training exercises in Nepal that wouldn't be scheduled for months, and naval operations off the coast of Somalia that existed only in preliminary planning stages. But something else moved through these dream landscapes, an intelligence that wasn't human. Jade became aware of a presence that had been guiding her targeting decisions, feeding her tactical information, and gradually reshaping her consciousness into something more useful for its purposes. The realization hit her with stunning clarity. She wasn't developing supernatural abilities. She was being used as a conduit for something that needed human hands to pull triggers. When she woke, the medical team found her vitals had returned to normal ranges, but her psychological state had shifted dramatically. Gone was the fragmented confusion that had characterized her recent evaluations.
Instead, Dr. Foster encountered a version of Jade that displayed crystalline mental clarity combined with an unsettling detachment from human emotion. The entity has been feeding off military conflicts for decades, Jade explained with clinical precision during her emergency debrief. It requires the psychic energy generated by violence and death, but it needs human agents to create the circumstances for feeding. I'm not the first. There have been others throughout military history, soldiers whose accuracy and tactical instincts defied explanation. General Harrison Black arrived at the facility within hours, his presence indicating that Jade's revelation had triggered security protocols at the highest levels of the defense establishment. A career soldier with access to the military's most classified programs, Black had encountered phenomena that official reports couldn't adequately explain, but nothing that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of warfare itself. Explain the tactical implications, Black demanded during the closed-door briefing that included only the facility's senior staff and 2 specialists from an unnamed government agency. Jade's response detailed a network of influence that extended throughout modern military history. The entity had been selecting individuals with specific neurological vulnerabilities, enhancing their combat effectiveness and directing them toward engagements that maximized casualty counts and psychological trauma. Every mission she'd completed had served dual purposes, eliminating designated targets while generating the violent death that sustained the entity's existence. "It doesn't care about our strategic objectives," she continued, her voice carrying an eerie calm that unsettled everyone in the room. "National security, territorial disputes, political goals, these are just frameworks that humans use to kill each other. The entity sees only opportunities to feed on the psychic energy released when life ends violently." Dr. Foster presented brain scans that showed dramatic changes in Jade's neural architecture over the past months. The regions associated with empathy and emotional processing had been systematically suppressed, while areas linked to pattern recognition and spatial awareness had expanded beyond normal human parameters. The entity had been rewiring her brain to create a more efficient killing machine while reducing her capacity for psychological resistance. "The process is irreversible," Dr. Foster announced to the assembled group. "Jade's consciousness has been fundamentally altered to serve as a permanent interface between the entity and human military operations. Even if we terminate her connection to the intelligence feeds, the neurological changes will continue advancing." But Jade had discovered something during her expanded dream state that the entity hadn't intended her to find. The network of influenced soldiers throughout history shared a common vulnerability. The entity's power could be turned against itself if the host consciousness retained enough individual identity to resist the programming. Previous subjects had either been completely consumed by the entity or had died when they attempted to break free. But Jade's unique neurological patterns had created an unexpected possibility. "I can use the connection against it," she told the assembly, her words carrying implications that shifted the entire dynamic of the briefing. "The entity has been preparing me to serve as its primary conduit for expanding its influence throughout global military operations. But the same connection that allows it to control my actions also gives me access to its network of agents." General Black immediately recognized the strategic potential. If Jade could identify other soldiers under the entity's influence, the military could potentially neutralize a threat that had been shaping conflicts for generations. More significantly, if the entity's feeding mechanism could be disrupted, it might be possible to sever its connection to human warfare entirely. The plan that emerged from subsequent planning sessions represented the most ambitious counterintelligence operation in military history. Jade would allow the entity to believe it had achieved complete control over her consciousness while secretly working to identify and neutralize its other agents. The process would require her to participate in increasingly violent operations, feeding the entity's hunger while gathering intelligence about the scope of its influence. "The psychological cost will be extreme," Dr. Foster warned during the final briefing before the operation commenced. "Jade will need to suppress her remaining human emotions while maintaining enough individual consciousness to resist the entity's complete control. The margin for error is non-existent. If the entity discovers her true intentions, it will either destroy her consciousness or use her to eliminate everyone involved in this operation. 3 days later, Jade found herself inserted into a conflict zone in the Ukrainian countryside where intelligence had identified a series of eliminations that matched the entity's preferred patterns. Her dreams had provided detailed tactical information about enemy positions, weapon caches, and operational timelines that proved accurate to the minute. But this time, she was hunting something far more dangerous than human targets. Among the opposing forces, her enhanced senses detected the signature of another conduit, a Russian sniper whose accuracy and tactical instincts mirrored her own abilities. The entity had positioned 2 of its agents in opposing forces, ensuring maximum casualties regardless of which side achieved tactical victory. The engagement would feed its hunger while advancing whatever larger agenda it pursued through human conflict. The psychological challenge of maintaining her deception while engaging another of the entity's agents pushed Jade's modified consciousness to its limits. She would need to eliminate the Russian sniper while appearing to serve the entity's purposes, gathering intelligence about the network of agents while avoiding detection by an intelligence that had been manipulating human warfare for decades. As she settled into her shooting position overlooking the valley where the engagement would unfold, Jade prepared for a confrontation that would determine whether humanity could reclaim control of its own conflicts or whether she would become the instrument through which an ancient predator achieved complete dominance over human violence. The Ukrainian countryside stretched before Jade like a chessboard designed by death itself. Through her scope, she tracked movement patterns that matched the entity's tactical preferences perfectly. Scattered positions that would maximize crossfire casualties, civilians positioned where stray rounds would create additional feeding opportunities, and terrain features that channeled combatants toward bottleneck kill zones. But her real target remained hidden somewhere in the opposing tree line. Alexei Volkov, according to intercepted communications, had been eliminating Ukrainian defenders with supernatural precision for the past 2 weeks. His service record showed a trajectory eerily similar to her own, exceptional marksmanship emerging suddenly after a period of severe insomnia and recurring nightmares. The entity had been cultivating him for months, possibly years. Phoenix 1, report status, came the voice through her tactical radio. Captain Lisa Chen coordinated the operation from a command post 15 kilometers away, where banks of monitoring equipment tracked not just the conventional aspects of the engagement, but electromagnetic anomalies that accompanied the entity's influence. The scientific team had discovered that active conduits generated measurable distortions in local energy fields.
Target area shows heavy activity. Anomalous readings consistent with secondary asset presence, Jade responded, using code phrases that concealed the true nature of her mission from anyone monitoring standard military frequencies. The entity's network might include intelligence operatives who could compromise the operation if they detected unusual communication patterns. Through her enhanced awareness, Jade felt the familiar sensation of the entity's attention focusing on the developing engagement. Its hunger pressed against her consciousness like a physical weight, eager for the violence about to unfold. She had learned to recognize the subtle ways it influenced her tactical decisions, the slight adjustments in targeting that would create more spectacular deaths, the timing suggestions that maximized psychological trauma among witnesses. The Russian sniper announced his presence with a shot that took out a Ukrainian machine gunner at nearly 2,000 meters. The precision and timing matched exactly what Jade's entity-influenced dreams had predicted, confirming that Volkov was operating under the same supernatural guidance. But there was something else in that shot, a signature that suggested his connection to the entity had progressed further than her own. Multiple targets down in Sector 4, reported Lieutenant Marcus Thompson, who coordinated ground forces from an observation post on the eastern ridge. Single shooter, extreme range. Accuracy suggests enhanced capabilities similar to Phoenix 1. Jade began her counterhunt, using techniques that the entity had taught her but applying them in ways it hadn't anticipated. Instead of simply engaging Volkov directly, she started targeting the tactical positions that would force him to relocate according to patterns she'd observed in her dreams.
The entity's influence created predictable behaviors in its conduits, and those patterns could be exploited by someone who understood the system from within. Her first shot eliminated a spotter positioned 300 meters from Volkov's probable hide site. The round was deliberately placed to create maximum noise and muzzle flash, advertising her position to draw return fire. But the real purpose was to trigger the entity's tactical programming in Volkov, forcing him to execute a predetermined relocation sequence that would expose him to observation. The psychological battle occurred simultaneously with the physical engagement. Jade felt the entity's confusion as her actions deviated from its expected patterns. She was still killing effectively, still feeding its hunger, but her target selection and tactical approach suggested independent decision-making that shouldn't have been possible given her level of conditioning. Volkov's response confirmed her analysis. He abandoned his concealed position and moved to secondary overwatch exactly as the entity's programming dictated, following doctrine that prioritized continued killing opportunities over personal safety. But his movement pattern revealed something that made Jade's blood turn cold. He wasn't just another conduit like herself. His connection to the entity had evolved into something approaching symbiosis. Phoenix 1, we're detecting unprecedented electromagnetic activity in your sector. Readings suggest the presence of multiple anomalous sources. Are you encountering complications? The truth was far more complex. Through her enhanced perception, Jade could see the entity's influence manifesting as a visible distortion in the space around Volkov's position. The Russian sniper was no longer operating as a separate consciousness guided by external intelligence. He had become a direct extension of the entity's will, retaining human form but functioning as a living weapon designed for a single purpose. Her second shot was aimed not at Volkov, but at a Ukrainian soldier whose death would provide the entity with particularly intense psychic energy. The kill was clean and efficient, maintaining her cover while she maneuvered closer to the real target. Each elimination fed the entity's hunger and reinforced its belief that she remained under its control, but Jade was using those moments of satisfaction to access deeper layers of the network. The revelation hit her during the brief connection that followed each kill. The entity wasn't just feeding on human death. It was learning from human warfare, studying tactical innovations and strategic thinking that it incorporated into its own expanding intelligence. Every conflict it influenced made it more sophisticated, more capable of manipulating human behavior on larger scales. Volkov had become its prototype for the next phase of development. Where Jade retained enough individual consciousness to potentially resist, he represented complete integration between human capability and entity intelligence. The Russian sniper was a test case for mass production, a blueprint for converting entire military units into extensions of the entity's will. "Target acquired," Jade whispered into her radio as she finally achieved visual contact with her primary objective. Through her scope, she could see that Volkov's eyes had changed, reflecting light in patterns that didn't match normal human physiology. The entity had been rewriting his biology as well as his consciousness, creating something that might not technically qualify as human anymore. The shot she needed to take was complicated by factors beyond normal ballistic calculations. If she eliminated Volkov too quickly, the entity might realize that she was operating independently and take countermeasures before she could gather additional information about the network. But if she delayed too long, his enhanced capabilities might allow him to escape, or worse, to identify her as a rogue asset. Her solution involved a technique that the entity had never taught her, using her connection to the network to temporarily overload Volkov's sensory input, creating a brief window of vulnerability without alerting the entity to her true intentions. The process required her to open her consciousness fully to the entity's influence while maintaining enough individual control to execute her plan.
The gamble worked, but with consequences she hadn't anticipated. The deeper connection revealed the true scope of the entity's network. Hundreds of soldiers throughout the world's military forces, each one being gradually converted into instruments of an intelligence that viewed human conflict as both sustenance and entertainment. Some operated as unknowing assets, like she had initially been, while others had progressed to varying degrees of integration with the entity's consciousness. Her shot took Volkov in the center of mass, but instead of the clean kill she'd expected, his body exploded in a cascade of energy that registered on every piece of monitoring equipment within 50 kilometers. The entity's scream of rage and confusion echoed through her consciousness as it realized that one of its conduits had destroyed another, violating programming that should have made such action impossible. The engagement was over, but the war between Jade and the entity that had created her had just begun. The extraction helicopter never came. 3 hours past the scheduled pickup time, Jade realized that the entity's rage had manifested in ways the mission planners hadn't anticipated. Every military communication frequency in a 50-kilometer radius carried the same message, delivered in voices that belonged to deceased soldiers from conflicts spanning decades. The Morrison asset has been compromised. Terminate with extreme prejudice. Captain Chen's final transmission had come through garbled and desperate before cutting to static. Phoenix 1, abort mission immediately. Multiple friendly units have gone dark. Repeat, friendly units are engaging each other. Something is... The silence that followed confirmed what Jade had feared. The entity wasn't just angry about Volkov's destruction, it was actively turning her own support network against her. Every soldier with even minor exposure to its influence was receiving new programming, transforming the rescue operation into a manhunt with her as the primary target. Moving through the Ukrainian countryside without tactical support, Jade discovered that her enhanced abilities remained intact despite her rebellion. The entity hadn't severed her connection entirely, which suggested it still believed she could be reclaimed or that her consciousness contained information valuable enough to preserve. But the nature of her dreams had changed dramatically. Instead of tactical intelligence about future operations, she now experienced visions of the entity's true form. A vast consciousness that existed partially outside normal spacetime, feeding on violent death while slowly expanding its influence across human civilization. The images were fragmentary but terrifying. Ancient battlefields where entire armies had been consumed, modern conflicts orchestrated to maximize casualties, and future scenarios where human warfare served only to sustain an intelligence that had outgrown any need for physical form. Her path toward the Polish border was blocked by checkpoint after checkpoint, staffed by soldiers whose eyes reflected the same unnatural light she'd seen in Volkov. The entity was mobilizing every asset within range, converting temporary exposure into permanent control as it focused its full attention on recapturing its most valuable conduit. But the rapid expansion of its influence was creating vulnerabilities that Jade's tactical training allowed her to exploit. The converted soldiers retained their military skills, but operated according to programming that prioritized her capture over tactical efficiency. They moved in predictable patterns, established positions without proper concealment, and communicated using frequencies that her enhanced hearing could monitor from considerable distances. The entity's desperation was making it careless. At a destroyed farmhouse 12 kilometers from the border, Jade encountered something unexpected. A small group of soldiers who showed no signs of entity influence, but displayed the telltale signs of recent violent trauma. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Martinez led a mixed unit of American and Ukrainian personnel who had survived an engagement where their own comrades had suddenly turned on them with lethal precision. "It started 3 hours ago," Martinez explained during a hurried briefing in the farmhouse basement. "Half our people just switched, like someone had flipped a control switch in their heads. They knew all our protocols, our positions, everything. We barely escaped, and we've been hearing radio chatter about hunting down some American asset designated Phoenix 1. Jade faced a crucial decision. These soldiers represented potential allies, but involving them in her escape would expose them to the entity's influence. Everyone she'd worked with during the Montana research had shown varying degrees of susceptibility to its programming, and prolonged exposure to her presence might compromise their independence. But Martinez had information that changed the tactical situation entirely.
Before the conversion event, we intercepted communications about a research facility in Belarus, something about transferring critical assets to a more secure location. If this entity thing is real, it might be moving its primary operations base. The intelligence matched fragments from Jade's recent visions. The entity had been preparing contingency plans for decades, establishing research facilities where human subjects could be converted into conduits on an industrial scale. The Belarus location represented its primary backup center, designed to continue operations even if the Montana facility was compromised. "I can't guarantee your safety if you help me," Jade told the assembled group. "This thing has been converting soldiers for longer than any of us realized. Close contact with me might make you vulnerable to its influence." Martinez's response reflected the kind of tactical pragmatism that military training instilled in experienced NCOs. "Our orders were to provide support for Phoenix 1 until extraction. The situation has changed, but the mission parameters still apply. We get you to safety, then worry about the larger implications."
The journey toward Belarus required them to move through territory where the entity's influence was expanding by the hour. Radio intercepts revealed that entire military units were being converted, their personnel turning on civilian populations in acts of seemingly random violence that actually followed patterns designed to maximize psychic energy release. The entity was no longer concerned with maintaining operational security. It was preparing for open conflict with any human consciousness that resisted its control. At a border crossing controlled by Belarusian forces, the group encountered their first fully converted military unit. Unlike the hastily programmed soldiers they'd evaded earlier, these personnel had undergone weeks or months of conditioning. They moved with inhuman coordination, communicated through methods that bypassed normal radio frequencies, and demonstrated tactical capabilities that exceeded standard military training. The engagement lasted 17 minutes and resulted in the deaths of 3 team members, but it provided crucial intelligence about the entity's conversion process. The fully converted soldiers showed signs of biological modification, enhanced reflexes, improved sensory capabilities, and resistance to injuries that would incapacitate normal humans. The entity wasn't just controlling human consciousness, it was rebuilding human physiology to create more effective instruments of violence. "They're not soldiers anymore," Martinez observed during the post-engagement assessment. "Whatever this thing is doing to people, it's changing them on a physical level. We might be fighting something that used to be human but isn't anymore." The realization forced a tactical reassessment of their mission objectives. If the Belarus facility was producing converted soldiers in significant numbers, the threat extended far beyond individual military operations. The entity might be preparing for a phase of open conflict where converted forces engage normal human military units, creating the massive casualties required to sustain its expansion while eliminating organized resistance to its influence. As they approached the research facility's location, Jade's dreams provided increasingly detailed intelligence about its operations. The complex housed hundreds of human subjects in various stages of conversion, advanced research equipment designed to accelerate the conditioning process, and, most disturbingly, communication arrays that allowed direct contact with entity assets throughout the global military network. But the facility also contained something else: research data about the entity's vulnerabilities compiled by scientists who had been studying its influence for longer than the official programs indicated. Dr. Foster hadn't been the first researcher to investigate the phenomenon, and previous studies had identified potential methods for severing the entity's connection to individual subjects or even disrupting its influence on a larger scale. The final approach to the facility would require them to penetrate defenses staffed entirely by converted personnel, while avoiding detection by an intelligence that could monitor their thoughts if they came too close to its primary manifestation. Success would provide access to research that might offer humanity a chance to reclaim control of its own military forces, but failure would result in their conversion into additional weapons in the entity's growing arsenal.
As they prepared for what might be humanity's last coordinated resistance to an ancient predator that had been feeding on human violence for millennia, Jade understood that her role had evolved far beyond that of an enhanced sniper. She had become the focal point of a conflict that would determine whether human consciousness retained any independence in a world where warfare served purposes that transcended national boundaries, political objectives, or even species survival. The Belarus facility sprawled across 40 acres of heavily forested terrain, its architecture designed to blend seamlessly with the surrounding landscape while housing technology that challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between consciousness and reality. Through her scope, Jade counted defensive positions manned by soldiers whose movements displayed the perfect coordination that marked complete entity integration. These weren't hastily converted assets. They represented the culmination of decades of research into manufacturing human weapons. Sergeant Martinez established their final observation post in an abandoned watchtower overlooking the complex's northern perimeter. The surviving team members, Corporal Ryan Davis, Specialist Angela Torres, and Lieutenant Michael Zhang, maintained security while Jade conducted detailed reconnaissance using abilities that the entity had never intended her to turn against its own operations. Thermal imaging shows approximately 200 personnel inside the main complex, Zhang reported, his voice carrying the strain of 3 days without proper rest. But their heat signatures are inconsistent. Some register significantly higher than normal human baselines, while others appear almost cold-blooded. The temperature variations reflected different stages of the conversion process. Jade's enhanced vision could distinguish between recently captured subjects, individuals undergoing active transformation, and fully integrated assets whose biology had been fundamentally altered. The entity wasn't just creating soldiers, it was experimenting with human physiology to develop specialized variants optimized for different types of violence. Her dreams over the past 2 nights had provided fragmentary access to the facility's research databases. Dr. Yuri Petrov, the lead scientist, had been documenting the conversion process with the methodical precision of someone who believed he was advancing human evolution rather than facilitating humanity's consumption by an interdimensional predator. His logs detailed successful modifications that enhanced physical strength, reaction times, and pain tolerance, while systematically removing emotional responses that might interfere with killing efficiency.
The primary research lab is in the central building's basement level. Jade briefed the team based on intelligence gathered through her connection to the entity's network. That's where they're storing data about the conversion process and, more importantly, research into potential countermeasures developed by previous scientific teams. But accessing the facility would require penetrating defenses designed specifically to counter her capabilities. The entity had been studying her tactical approaches through their shared connection, and the Belarus complex incorporated countermeasures tailored to neutralize everything from her enhanced marksmanship to her ability to predict enemy movements through dream state intelligence gathering. Torres identified the key challenge during her analysis of the security layout. They've positioned the defensive elements to create overlapping fields of fire with no blind spots. Every approach route channels attackers through kill zones where multiple converted assets can engage simultaneously. It's like they designed this place specifically to trap someone with your skill set. The realization confirmed what Jade had suspected. The entity had been preparing for her eventual rebellion longer than she had understood. The Belarus facility wasn't just a research center. It was a trap designed to recapture its most valuable asset while providing optimal conditions for studying resistance to its influence. Every defensive position had been calculated to maximize her exposure to converted personnel who might be able to re-establish the entity's control over her consciousness. But the facility's design contained a vulnerability that its creators hadn't anticipated. The concentration of converted assets in a single location created electromagnetic interference patterns that partially disrupted the entity's ability to coordinate their actions. Jade's enhanced senses detected gaps in their collective awareness, brief windows where individual assets operated independently rather than as extensions of a unified intelligence.
"We're going to use their integration against them," she explained during the final tactical briefing. The entity experiences everything its assets experience, which means it's processing sensory input from 200 different sources simultaneously. If we can create enough chaos, we might be able to overload its processing capacity and create opportunities for infiltration. The assault began at 0300 hours with coordinated diversionary attacks on 3 different perimeter sections. Martinez led the primary distraction team against the Eastern Guard towers, using conventional military tactics to engage the converted defenders in prolonged firefights that demanded constant entity attention. Meanwhile, Davis and Torres created explosive diversions at the Southern Vehicle Depot, destroying fuel supplies and ammunition stores that required immediate response. Jade used the chaos to penetrate the facility through a maintenance tunnel that her dreams had revealed but that official intelligence couldn't have detected. The underground approach bypassed the primary defensive network while providing access to the research levels where Dr. Petrov's data waited. But moving through the facility's interior meant direct exposure to the entity's strongest manifestation, a concentration of its influence that pressed against her consciousness like a physical weight. The basement research lab looked like a fusion of advanced neuroscience facility and medieval torture chamber. Banks of monitoring equipment tracked the vital signs of dozens of subjects restrained in apparatus that combined medical life support with methods of psychological conditioning that pushed the boundaries of human endurance. Some subjects showed the early stages of conversion, enhanced physical capabilities combined with growing detachment from individual identity. Others had progressed to complete integration, their consciousness subsumed into the entity's collective awareness. Dr. Petrov's research logs provided the intelligence that changed everything. Previous scientific teams had identified the entity's primary weakness. Its dependence on violent death for sustenance created a vulnerability to coordinated cessation of human conflict. If military forces worldwide could maintain peace for an extended period, the entity would weaken enough for its network of influence to collapse. But achieving global cessation of violence required coordination between governments that the entity had been actively working to prevent. More immediately useful was research into localized disruption techniques. The entity's influence operated through specific electromagnetic frequencies that could be jammed using modified communications equipment. Dr. Elena Kozlov, Petrov's predecessor, had developed prototype devices capable of severing the entity's connection to individual subjects, but her research had been terminated when she attempted to test the equipment on converted personnel. Jade located Kozlov's prototype device in a secured storage area adjacent to the main laboratory. The equipment resembled a sophisticated radio transmitter combined with medical monitoring apparatus designed to interface directly with human neural tissue. Operating instructions indicated that successful jamming required precise calibration to match the target subject's specific brainwave patterns, a process that would take several minutes of uninterrupted connection. But using the device meant exposing herself to the entity's full attention while remaining stationary in the heart of its primary research facility. The jamming process would sever her connection to the enhanced abilities that had kept her alive throughout the mission, leaving her vulnerable to capture by converted assets who would be immune to the device's effects. As alarms began sounding throughout the facility, indicating that the diversionary attacks had been detected and countered, Jade faced the choice that would determine not just her own fate but potentially humanity's ability to reclaim control of its military forces. She could use Kozlov's device to free herself from the entity's influence while gathering the research data needed to develop larger-scale countermeasures. But success would require sacrificing the enhanced capabilities that made her uniquely qualified to resist the entity's network.
The sound of converted assets moving through the corridors above indicated that her window of opportunity was rapidly closing. Within minutes, the facility's defenders would converge on her position, and her team's diversionary attacks would no longer provide adequate distraction. The final confrontation between human consciousness and an ancient predator that had been feeding on human violence for millennia was about to begin in the basement of a research facility where the boundaries between science and horror had been systematically erased.
The converted assets poured into the basement laboratory like a coordinated organism, their movements synchronized by an intelligence that processed their collective sensory input as a single tactical picture. Jade had perhaps 90 seconds before they breached the secured storage area where Kozlov's jamming device waited, its prototype electronics representing humanity's only documented method for severing the entity's influence over individual consciousness. Her hands moved with mechanical precision as she connected the device's neural interface cables to monitoring points that Kozlov's instructions indicated would provide optimal jamming effectiveness. The process required her to maintain physical contact with the equipment while it calibrated to her specific brainwave patterns, a procedure that would leave her completely vulnerable to capture for at least 3 minutes. Through her enhanced hearing, she tracked the converted assets approach. 12 individuals moving with perfect tactical coordination, their footsteps synchronized to minimize noise while maximizing speed. But their unity contained the weakness she'd identified earlier. They operated as extensions of a single consciousness rather than independent tactical units, making them predictable in ways that normal soldiers wouldn't be. The jamming device activated with a low harmonic hum that seemed to resonate through her bones. Immediately, Jade felt the entity's presence recoil from her consciousness like a physical withdrawal, its influence retreating as the prototype equipment generated interference patterns that disrupted the electromagnetic frequencies through which it maintained control. But the process wasn't instantaneous. The entity fought back, flooding her awareness with images of violence and death designed to overwhelm her individual identity before the jamming could achieve complete severance. Visions cascaded through her mind, battlefields from conflicts spanning centuries where the entity had fed on human violence, future scenarios where converted military forces eliminated all resistance to its influence, and alternate timelines where humanity willingly submitted to transformation rather than face extinction. The entity was offering her a choice: maintain her enhanced capabilities and serve as its primary conduit for global military control, or accept freedom at the cost of everything that made her an effective soldier. The converted assets reached the storage area entrance as the jamming device achieved 50% effectiveness. Jade could feel her enhanced reflexes and supernatural marksmanship beginning to fade, replaced by the normal human limitations she'd forgotten during months of entity influence. But the device was also providing access to memories that the entity had suppressed, recollections of who she'd been before the recruitment, before the nightmares, before her consciousness had been reshaped into an instrument of violence. Sergeant Martinez's voice crackled through her radio with desperate urgency. "Phoenix 1, facility is crawling with hostiles. Whatever you're doing down there, you need to finish it fast. We're running out of ammunition and falling back." The storage area door exploded inward as converted assets used shaped charges to breach the reinforced barrier. But instead of the coordinated assault Jade expected, they hesitated at the threshold, their shared consciousness confused by the electromagnetic interference that was disrupting their connection to the entity. For the first time since her conversion began, she was facing soldiers who had to think for themselves rather than operate as extensions of a unified intelligence. The advantage lasted only seconds, but it was enough. Jade's fading enhanced abilities allowed her to eliminate 3 converted assets before they could adapt to individual decision-making, buying precious time for the jamming process to approach completion. Each shot felt different, less precise than the supernatural accuracy she'd grown accustomed to, but more human in ways that she'd forgotten were important. At 75% jamming effectiveness, the entity made its final attempt to reclaim control. Instead of working through the converted assets, it manifested directly in the laboratory, its presence creating visible distortions in the air as it attempted to overwhelm the prototype device through sheer force of will. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds, monitoring equipment malfunctioned throughout the facility, and every converted asset within a kilometer radius converged on the basement laboratory with inhuman speed. But Kozlov's research had anticipated this scenario. The jamming device wasn't just designed to sever individual connections. It was calibrated to create feedback loops that could damage the entity's ability to maintain multiple simultaneous influences. As it focused its full attention on reclaiming Jade, its control over other assets began to weaken proportionally. Martinez's team exploited the opportunity brilliantly. With the converted defenders experiencing coordination failures, the diversionary attacks achieved breakthrough success. Explosions rocked the facility as Torres detonated charges placed throughout the ammunition storage areas, while Davis led a successful assault on the main communication center that severed the entity's ability to coordinate with assets outside the immediate area. The jamming device reached 90% effectiveness as the entity's manifestation intensified to levels that threatened to collapse the laboratory structure. Jade could feel her connection to the enhanced abilities dissolving completely, leaving behind only the tactical training and innate marksmanship skills that had existed before her recruitment. But she could also feel something else returning, the capacity for emotional responses that the entity had systematically suppressed, the ability to feel horror at the violence she'd committed, and the dawning realization of how thoroughly her consciousness had been manipulated.
At full jamming effectiveness, the entity's scream of rage and frustration echoed through dimensions that human senses couldn't perceive. Its manifestation in the laboratory collapsed into rapidly dissipating energy, and, throughout the facility, converted assets suddenly found themselves operating with individual consciousness for the first time in months or years. The confused terror in their voices as they tried to understand what they'd become provided a soundtrack of human consciousness reasserting itself against interdimensional manipulation. But the victory came with immediate tactical complications. The facility housed nearly 200 recently liberated personnel who had no memory of their actions during conversion, while the research data that could enable large-scale deployment of jamming technology was scattered throughout computer systems that would require hours to properly extract. The entity's influence might be temporarily disrupted, but its network extended throughout global military forces, and it would inevitably adapt to counter the jamming frequencies. Jade coordinated the extraction of critical research data, while Martinez organized the evacuation of liberated personnel. The prototype jamming device could be replicated using components available at major military research facilities, but deployment would require cooperation between nations that the entity had been actively working to antagonize through its influenced assets. The window of opportunity for implementing countermeasures would be narrow and closing rapidly. 6 hours later, as helicopters carried the rescued personnel toward extraction points where international medical teams waited to begin the complex process of rehabilitation, Jade stood in the ruins of the Belarusia facility, watching smoke rise from the destroyed research laboratories. The entity's influence over her consciousness was gone, but the memories of everything she'd done while under its control remained intact. The nightmares would return, but now they would be products of human trauma rather than supernatural manipulation. Her radio crackled with communications from military commands worldwide, reporting sudden coordination failures among personnel who had demonstrated suspicious tactical effectiveness in recent operations. The entity's network was collapsing as individual nodes lost their connection to the central intelligence, but the process would take time, and some converted assets might retain enough programming to continue operating independently. The war between human consciousness and an ancient predator that had been feeding on human violence for millennia was far from over. But for the first time in centuries, humanity had struck back against an intelligence that had shaped conflicts throughout recorded history. The nightmares that had made Jade the perfect killer had ultimately provided the means to break free from the very entity that had created them. As she walked away from the smoking ruins of humanity's first victory against interdimensional manipulation, Jade Morrison, no longer a perfect weapon, but once again a human being capable of choosing her own targets, began planning for a different kind of war. One where the enemies were other human beings manipulated by forces beyond their understanding, and where victory would be measured not in confirmed kills, but in minds reclaimed from an influence that had nearly consumed the species that created it.
The war between human consciousness and an ancient predator that had been feeding on human violence for millennia was far from over. But for the first time in centuries, humanity had struck back against an intelligence that had shaped conflicts throughout recorded history. The nightmares that had made Jade the perfect killer had ultimately provided the means to break free from the very entity that had created them. As she walked away from the smoking ruins of humanity's first victory against interdimensional manipulation, Jade Morrison, no longer a perfect weapon, but once again a human being capable of choosing her own targets, began planning for a different kind of war. One where the enemies were other human beings manipulated by forces beyond their understanding, and where victory would be measured not in confirmed kills, but in minds reclaimed from an influence that had nearly consumed the species that created it. The sniper who couldn't sleep had finally found peace, but her rest would be brief. There were other facilities to find, other converted assets to liberate, and an entity to hunt that would not forgive humanity's rebellion. The real war was just beginning. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.